Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone here in Dayton, and good morning, everyone that's attending virtually. I am Bill Madro, and I'm part of the Education Programming Committee, and it is my honor to moderate our today's session, Advocating for Your Slice of the Pie, and it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters. Colette Madonna is the Archivist and Library Manager at the Kettering Foundation. Her main responsibilities include processing the Foundation's collections and provides reference and research support by assisting other employees. She also handles interlibrary loans and manages the library's journal subscriptions. Colette is a certified archivist and an active member of the Society of American Archivists and the Society of Ohio Archivists. Colette currently serves as the chair of the Advocacy and Outreach Committee and is on the Strategic Planning Committee for SOA. She holds an MA in History with an emphasis in Public History from Wright State University. Sarah Eisenberg is a certified archivist, and she's the archivist for the Sisters of the Precious Blood in Dayton, Ohio. She earned her master's in Public History from Wright State University, and she started her career at the Dayton Society of Natural History as the Clear Registrar. She was then the archivist for the Dawes Arboretum in Newark, Ohio, before coming to the Sisters of Precious Blood in 2018. She became a member of the Academy of Certified Archivists in 2020. Hila Harris is currently the Assistant Director of the Marion Library at the University of Dayton. As of Monday, she'll be the Director
Thank you.
of the Marion Library. So we're also happy to congratulate her. She oversees a variety of functions between 4 meetings. And oversees a variety of functions for the multifaceted collection consisting of artwork collections, circulating in rare books, and archival material. She is a certified archivist and holds a digital archivist certificate from the Society of American Archivists. So they're going to do the presenting. Of course, we'll do the questions and answer at the end. Okay, please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Thank you. Hi. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this session. I'm a little sad because I also want to go hear about America 250. So thank you for coming here. Hopefully our colleagues will fill us in afterwards about that great session.
I understand they're live tweeting about it.
Good. You can access both. So today we're going to kind of talk about advocacy from 3 different standpoints. And so we already did kind of our introductions. Tech support. Oh wait, it's not on. Oh, there we go. Maybe that. Nope. Still.
It thinks it says
Thank you. Okay, so first, we're just going to kind of give a brief introduction before we go into our 3 different stories where we talk more about different types of advocacy. But first, a little bit about what is advocacy. We heard a little bit about it this morning during the keynote section. And so from the Alliance for Justice, advocacy is any action that speaks in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends, or pleads on behalf of others. And then we have, sorry, I'm reading the wrong slide. This is the session outline. This is what we're going to talk about. Now I'm going to go to advocacy. So you got a sneak peek. So I already talked about what the Alliance for Justice is, or what their definition is. And so another kind of definition is advocacy is the act or process of supporting a cause or proposal. Finally, advocacy is pleading for, supporting, or recommending. So we hear a lot about advocacy in archives. You know, we need to be advocating for our collections, advocating for funding, not as much about advocating for ourselves and our jobs, which is kind of a little bit more about what we're going to talk about during our sections today.
Okay, so we wanted to talk a little bit about the types of advocacy. And so in general, kind of outside of the archive, so kind of more in a public sphere, we have legal advocacy, so appealing to lawmakers about immediate needs. And then on the archival side, we talk about appealing to lawmakers about archival needs, a lot like what Mackenzie talked about this morning. In general, educational advocacy is using public tools like social media to educate people about specific topics. And then archival, we have, Archives Week, other endeavors that we use on social media. Institutional or systems advocacy is working to enact long-term changes through policy change or raising awareness. And our institutional advocacy is more like presentations to the heads of our organizations or boards about our archives. And self-advocacy and archival advocacy in general are relatively similar, except in general, it can include not only better working conditions, but your medical decisions, your personal protection, those types of things. And why is advocacy important? It gives underrepresented people a voice. It influences public policies and laws. It promotes peaceful resolution to conflict, and it educates people about current issues. So this is archival and not. One of the things that I've been working towards is becoming a good archival citizen. So this is not just being an archivist, it's being an archivist in the world. So how can I use that platform for good and not for evil? And then we also wanted to kind of talk about how advocacy in the archives, a broad idea, and then our focused idea that will kind of stem through our three stories. So advocacy in the archives usually means increasing public awareness, targeting your public leaders, and then within archival organizations. And then one that we could have included was also a community-wide effort. So again, we keep referencing Mackenzie's talk this morning because so much of it was about advocacy. But what we are going to specifically talk about today is speaking up for yourself, communicating your needs, finding out who is going to support you. So this also means talking to leaders in your organization and finding support in archival organizations. So exactly like what we are doing here today. And now Colette's going to talk.
So I'm going to talk about how I got my full-time job. So I started out the Kettering Foundation back when I was in grad school as a little baby archivist. And over years, I was there. I left for a little bit, worked actually here, well, not in this building, but here for a little while. And I eventually was invited back. And I'd been there as a contract archivist for about 7 years. And I had been looking for other jobs, and I was offered so my contract job did have some good things about it. I had a lot of flexibility, and I was able to go and work other jobs. The bad thing was I made practically nothing. And that was pretty much the big thing. Also, I didn't have any benefits. And I didn't feel like I really belonged at any of these jobs. So I wanted a full-time job, and there was so many reasons to have it, but mostly the scratch. So I was like, I'm going to at least try to get a full-time job at the Kettering Foundation. And I'll move this a little bit. See it. So I went to my boss, who held my contract, and she basically said, nah, I don't think that's going to work out. So she was not going to advocate for me. So then I realized I'm going to have to advocate for myself. And it was kind of scary because I wasn't used to going and talking to the upstairs people. I work down in the basement. There's no room, there's no windows. And so I was afraid of the window people. So I went to her boss. And basically I went completely prepared about all the work that I did and how I was helping the foundation, and basically saying I'd not been offered a job in Texas. And could they do anything? So I had to advocate for myself, and it was very scary. I wasn't used to talking to the vice president of the organization. So I moved up the ladder from talking to my boss, Libby, and talking to the vice president, and came prepared with all my duties and like everything I had done that year. And I'd only worked 25 hours a week, and basically saying, I'm still behind. There's no way I can keep up with all this work with only working 25 hours a week. And I was just getting more behind and more behind and more behind every year. And it was just not feasible because they're still working up there. They're still doing work. And so that meant that I was just going to have a more and more and more of a backlog that was just going to crush me and kill me. Maybe a little bit dramatic. And mentioned that at one point we had 5 part-time archivists in the archive, and meaning that they were working anywhere between 50 to 75 hours a week. And I was just asking for 40. And of course, I got to include my man, Uncle Chuck, otherwise known as Charles Kettering. One fails forward towards success. And he has lots and lots of, if you want to have a quote about failing in a good way, you go to Uncle Chuck. He will help you out. You'll find a great quote from him. So what happened? Did they just like throw me out on my ear and say, get out of here? No, I still work there. Can't. So first they offered me a part-time job, but with the actual Kettering Foundation. So I got benefits for the first time in my life. I was over 30. And they said, basically, we can't offer you a full-time job right this very minute, but we can in 6 months after the board met. So within 6, maybe 7 months, I had a full-time job at the Kettering Foundation, and I had actually, I could take time off and still get paid. And it was just, it was amazing. That was a big thing about contract work. It's like, so I have to get, if I take vacation, I get no money. They're like, yeah, you get no money. Oh, man. So how do you advocate better for yourself? First of all, you got to have your support system. And one of the best ways of having a support system is right here at SOA. Especially if you come to the meetings, you make new friends, you meet people, and you hopefully find some people that will help you advocate for yourself. In the Miami Valley, we have the MVAR, the Miami Valley Archives Roundtable. That's a great place to meet people about how to, talking about advocating. Your friends, maybe from grad school. 2 of mine are sitting right there. And maybe even your workplace. I work for a place that I'm the only we have a part-time archivist, but I'm the only full-time archivist there. So archives aren't always on people's minds. So that's my job, to get it in people's minds. You also need to just believe in yourself. And I know, as I was a little baby archivist back in the day, and I didn't really have a lot of belief in myself. I was happy like just living down in my basement and working away. But I needed to take the bull by the horns, and that's not usually the type of person I am. And be willing to basically get out of your comfort zone. And for me, that was basically talking to, any of the people who make, decisions at the foundation. I was kind of afraid of them. Hold on. Let's see my thing. What are you saying?
No, we're good.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
And sometimes self-advocacy doesn't mean like, working for a full, towards a full-time job. It might just mean a better chair. Because sometimes you work at a place and the archive gets all the hand-me-downs and all you want is just a new chair. This is me. This is Kayla.
Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Kayla Harris. As Bill said in the intro, I'm currently the assistant director and archivist of the Marion Library. And then starting on Monday, I get to go to a lot more meetings as I become the director and oversee more than just the archives of our collection. So a little bit of just kind of context before I get into talking about my piece, which is about using statistics alongside stories and not having those be two separate kind of ways to advocate, is just a little bit of context about the University of Dayton. So it's a private institution, Catholic and Marianist. And so our special collections are kind of siloed in a sense. So we have a University Archives and Special Collections, which Jim is here today. And that's kind of the traditional archives and special collections. We also have a smaller collection that is technically part of the main university libraries called the U.S. Catholic Special Collection. Many of you may know Stephanie Schreffler, who works with that. And then there's the Marion Library. And so the Marion Library has the most people assigned to it, but that is also because we have more than archives. There's usually one archivist, but then we also have rare books, we have circulating material, and we have a really large artwork and artifact collection. So the Marion Library collects everything about Mary. So that is kind of the situation that we are at UD. So this here, and I know you won't be able to kind of read all of the details, but this is an infographic from the 2019 to 2020 academic year at the University of Dayton. And we have a really fantastic graphic designer named Ann Zlotnick. I'm trying to credit people for their work in the corner. So she kind of takes the data and puts it into something like this. And the infographics have been used for several years. They would go up on the website. And one of the kind of important parts was that they would put up the infographic from the year before and then put up this year. So you could be like, look at how much more we did. We checked out more books. We did more instruction sessions. And, as you may know, statistics can kind of be used when they're good. You don't want to say like, look, we had a terrible year. Like, let's put this infographic up to compare it to the previous year. And so, in fact, this infographic too, this is for the entire university libraries. So you may notice if you're kind of scanning some of the things, there's not a lot about special collections on here. In fact, there's one line about special collections, all those 3 units, and it says 383 special collections materials requests. And I'll be honest, I'm not even entirely sure what that number came from in terms of materials requests because of the way we kind of had recorded things previously. And so when I was looking back through this, I was trying to find the one from 2021 for the next academic year, for 2020 to 2021. Or no, this was the next academic year. But I was going back through my email and it wasn't there. And I reached out to a colleague and she kind of confirmed what I thought was when they were trying to figure out what sort of statistics to put on the next year's infographic, the dean of our library was like, these numbers are terrible. We don't want to show this. And so that kind of precipitated a move away from okay, maybe we shouldn't just be talking about numbers, because if they're not going up, we don't want to put it on the website and be like, look, we just came through COVID, people were furloughed, you know, but look, we did less this year. You don't want to show that because we all felt like we were doing a lot more. So I know not everyone is from academic libraries, so I will try to keep the kind of nitty gritty details brief. But in academic libraries, there's something called the ACRL Academic Library Trends and Statistics Survey. And it's something that most academic, like nearly all academic libraries participate in. And so there's actually a rule that every institution of higher ed receiving federal funding must respond to this component of it called IPEDS. And so by responding to the ACRL survey, the IPEDS is kind of wrapped into it. So basically just know, like, academic institutions, we do this. And as you can see on the slide, there's kind of this brief mention of, you know, the description of the survey, and it says, you know, it's the biggest one, the premier one. Oh yeah, and their special collections and archives. And so my understanding of statistics when I started, you know, at UD in 2016, and I was just kind of told like, oh yeah, we got to fill out these forms because they're for the ACRL statistics, was, you know, we have to do this. It goes up to a higher funding age, you know, a higher body, and this is why we're doing it. But that was kind of the extent of what I knew about what they were collecting. One thing that happened recently within the last cycle of these statistics is we had a new associate dean who was in charge of them. And what they did was really pull out, because it turns out that our statistics forms that we were using incorporated these questions that were required for the ACRL survey, and also some ones that we internally as a library had just kind of added along the way. But it wasn't indicated on the form which were which. So it wasn't clear, like, if this was something that we were collecting just for us and therefore had the ability to maybe alter or collect it in a different way if we wanted to tell a different story, or which ones were really set at that level. And so on the right hand of the side, you can kind of see these are the only fields from the ACRL survey that actually applied to special collections. So it's about information services to groups and information services to individuals. So things like processing, exhibits, like all of that we were sort of doing, that was all internal. That was not something that was being reported up through the ACRL statistics. And then I also just put one thing that we did was we added in our new spreadsheet was kind of adding that mapping of like, okay, here's what ACRL asked for. And so this is how it maps exactly. So that's why we kind of added in, this is line 72 of the survey, because it's this massive survey that's affecting all divisions of the university libraries. Okay, so now kind of an example of like why this matters and about how the numbers, you know, can be used to tell different stories. So one of my questions when I was starting was I had this form, and this was before it was clarified which was ACRL numbers and which was just our own internal statistics, was it just said linear feet processed. And, you know, I'm no professional archivist. So I was like, okay, like, what does that mean? And the other thing too is that the Marion Library would have a statistics form, but then so would the University Archives and Special Collections, and so would the US Catholic. So we wanted to make sure that however we were interpreting this, that we were doing so consistently across the units. And so when I say that it can kind of mean different things, if it depends on what the goal is. So if the goal of linear feet processed is to understand how many total linear feet you have in your collection, that might be one way to think of it. Or it could be, you know, to help calculate space concerns. Like if I added 60 new linear feet and I already knew that we were up to this and we're now X% full. But the other side of it is it kind of being used to measure archivist productivity? And that was the thing that I was a little bit worried about, you know, going back to that comment from the dean of like, these numbers look terrible. What if, you know, she didn't say this, but it made me think, well, we've been very busy. It's not that we're not busy. And so the example here I've got on the screen, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, when you start with a collection, you have X number. So here's an example. It was 220 plus-ish boxes, and the linear feet's estimated because the collection came in like various types of boxes. Some were falling apart, some were just thrown on tables. So, you know, you kind of estimate this is about how many linear feet it is, but then it gets processed into a much smaller number. So is the linear feet the number that you had to go through? Because an archivist had to physically go through those boxes and decide what stuff was worth keeping, how they were going to organize it. So there's a big difference between 220 linear feet processed versus this final total of like 60. And so that's kind of one example of how that simple question of like, oh, we're just going to put a stat out there of linear feet processed can really mean different things depending on what you're trying to use that statistic to show. So kind of as I mentioned before, now that we had it separated out between what were the ACRL statistic numbers versus what we wanted to count internally, we started thinking about what other things did we feel we wanted to count. And again, this could partially be to get to that question of like, see, Dean, we're being very productive. We're doing lots of things. It's just not always, you know, just answering reference questions, which was the only statistic that was really counted on the ACRL survey. And so we added in things like physical and digital exhibits, adding in, if they were digital exhibits, adding in our Google Analytics to see what the page count was. So even though an exhibit might have been created 2 years ago and it wouldn't be a new exhibit, maybe it became relevant and timely and got a bunch of hits that year. So I think that's important to think about. Web archiving, that was something that wasn't counted anywhere. And even kind of our born digital processing, you know, counting the linear feet was important, but especially for our university archives and special collections, who is doing a lot more born digital processing, having different ways to count that, again, so that's showing like, yes, we may be doing less of this thing, but that's because our role has shifted and now we're doing more of this thing. And so then another way that we kind of started sharing these other things that couldn't be captured in just the statistics was just this past year, all of the units in the library created internal annual reports. And it's a terrible time of year because like everyone's already stressed. It's statistic time. Everyone across the library is contributing. And so at first it was like, okay, cool, like another thing to have to do, but it's really just meant internal. And so these internal annual reports focus on things like our challenges, the strengths that we felt like we accomplished in that past year, our goals for the next year. And so each team or unit kind of did them a little differently. Some would use the infographics again, and some would just use it as kind of an open space to be like, it was a tough year. We had to, you know, have 3 searches because we had position turnover. And so I think having a different way to capture the work that is happening in a special collections unit beyond just the statistics is important. And then I just want to point out too, the image I have here on the bottom right, one of the things that we had that we were able to that wasn't captured anywhere else except our internal report is the University of Dayton participates in an Ohio Link program called the Luminaries. And it's an opportunity where students from underserved populations can have an internship at the library where they rotate through different divisions. And just, it's not necessarily to like bring in people to the library because some of them are going to decide like libraries are not for me. Some of them have. Our first intern actually is now in library school. But one of the interns that we had who had her rotation in the Marion Library had an interest in sustainability, graphic design. And so while she learned about the collections, she also got to do this really great creative project. So there's a fantastic collection in the Marion Library called Mary Gardens, where it's about these gardens where the flowers have Marion plant names. And so she used that collection she did some kind of the traditional archival work, but then used it to make a creative project where she made her own graphic design image. And this is now something that kind of hangs on our wall in the collection. So when we talk about like impact, this was a big impact for her, for our collection. We've traditionally been kind of for the serious academic researchers and not as much integrated with the undergrad students. So things like this are things that we point to when we talk to advancement to donors, and that isn't as represented in just our stats alone. Okay, and then one more example about this kind of difference between the numbers and then the storytelling behind it. So the Marion Library at the University of Dayton has a very large collection of nativities or creches, over 3,600. And several years ago, they started this event. Sometimes it was a big event the day after Thanksgiving. And it was really a community focused event where they would put the nativities on display and people would come in and see them. And so it was throughout December. There'd usually be weekend hours. Oftentimes the students had kind of gone home. So it was really more focused on the community of Dayton, not necessarily our community on campus. They're really popular. Everyone loves them. And if they're not out, they come in and say like, where are the nativities? It even made it to CBS Sunday Morning in 2019. So like, it's what we're known for, even though we have lots of great things. Well, this past, COVID kind of disrupted that. The CBS Sunday Morning happened in 2019. So we had this great momentum. Then we had 2020. And so we had a digital exhibit. And even in 2021, we had kind of a scaled back version because we're still in the pandemic. Having a big event with lots of crowds is not the goal. So, but this past year, 2022, my supervisor, Sarah Cahalan, had this idea. She wanted to do something different. And part of this was to kind of reset expectations around the nativities because they kept getting higher and higher and we can't always reach them. But there's this story, a medieval story about juggling for Marion. And basically it's a Christmas story in that this humble juggler, he has no gifts to give this statue of the Virgin Mary in a monastery. Everyone else bakes cakes and performs songs, but all he can do is juggle. So he juggles and the statue comes to life. It's basically the gist of it. And it's a story that's been retold in many different formats. So Tommy DePaola the famous author and illustrator of Strega Nona did a version called Clown of God. There was animations, operas, etc. And so she really wanted to feature our Christmas exhibit, getting away from calling it just At the Manger, around this story. And so we had this really successful space down in our freshly renovated gallery about this story. And on the surface, it was not that successful because when we look purely at our exhibit attendance, the attendance for the pre-COVID, like 2019 year when we were on CBS Sunday Morning was much, much higher than we had for this Juggling for Mary exhibit. But going back to that, the stories and the things that the numbers don't tell. So on the screen, on the one side, you'll see, you may recognize my husband, Andrew Harris, juggling. So we really made this space kid friendly. So even though the nativities were always out there for kids to enjoy, for those of you that know young kids, telling them to come in and like look at this stuff, but don't touch anything, not very fun. And so this space was really meant to be interactive and fun. We had a basket with bean bags that you could practice your own juggling. There was an animation playing. It was kid safe and kid friendly. And so we worked really closely with the Bombeck Family Learning Center on campus. And so these are some of the little preschoolers that came in. They had a juggling lesson, and 5 to 6 months later, when my husband goes to pick up our kids at the Bombeck, the kids run up to him and say, "I'm still practicing juggling." So like it had a pretty profound impact on them. And then also on the other side with the Post-it notes, we just had for Library Appreciation Week, there was an opportunity for visitors. This was right before the students went home to kind of leave a note about what they liked about the library. And we were pleasantly surprised. that someone put a note and then someone seconded it and said, bring back the juggling room. So we had a pretty good connection with students. And so, as I said, the outside community, and maybe this goes a little bit against what Mackenzie was talking about earlier, because the previous exhibit was really community focused. And this one, we just wanted to try something different. And it was much more of a UD focused thing. So we had, for example, a capstone English course that was learning about vocation came in. We had a religion 103 course where the students were like having the best time of their lives, coloring pages and taking their photos in our photo board. But we also partnered really heavily with the teacher education program. They created an outside story walk that was on sandwich boards, and it was around campus using that Tommy DePaula book. And so Bombeck, as well as some other local schools, came through and toured it. We had a theater performance in there. So there was a lot of UD focused engagement with it. And, you know, when we were starting to think about what we were going to do for our next exhibit, we started thinking like, okay, well, the community missed the nativities, and several of them angrily told us like, this is cool, but like, where's the nativities? But I think just, you know, going back to the idea of like what the goals are, and advocating for, yes, I know the community wants the nativities and we'll still put some out, but we saw a lot of value with a different community, our local campus community, with this type of exhibit. And so having those things that go beyond just the attendance numbers is helpful for then me to go to advocate to our dean, hey, we want to do something like this again. It's not going to get us on CBS Sunday Morning, but it's really going to make a different type of impact. And then lastly, you know, I mentioned back at the beginning to that infographic. One of the things, now there are not any infographics on our library website, and not that they won't come back, they might, but the library is really focusing on, there's a page called Our Stories. And this links to some blog posts. It does have a few statistics on there, but really getting to these different ways that the collections are having an impact. So a couple of these up here are examples from the Marion Library. We had a wonderful student employee who used his history and Italian background to work on our exhibits. Now he's going to library school. We had an example about a professor in a research fellowship. So again, just thinking that like, I know I personally was always under the impression that like, I gotta have hard numbers. Numbers are facts. Numbers are what are gonna get us the resources that we need to be able to do what we wanna do. And I don't think that's entirely the case. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Okay, so before I begin in earnest, I wanted to go last because I have a bit of like a sensitivity warning before I start talking. So I'm going to be talking about mental health issues, grief, and end of life issues. So if this is something that you are not ready for, if this is not the day for that for you, please feel free to leave and I will not be offended at all. So when the three of us decided that we were going to do this presentation late last year, I didn't really know what I was going to talk about. I am a lone arranger. It's just me. And there has always been historic support for the archives in my organization, the Sisters of the Precious Blood. They are very proud of their history. They are very proud of how long they've been in Dayton. So actually in October this year, we're celebrating their 100th anniversary of moving to the Dayton area. So, you know, they're very, always very supportive. But then in January, I had a mental health episode that made me realize exactly what I was going to talk about. And this is something that we don't always talk about because sometimes it can be uncomfy. But I really want to encourage more dialogue around this. And so what I am going to do is share some of the helpful tips I've received during this time, specifically related to archival work and the toll it can take when we are working with sensitive or difficult materials. So, like I said, I'm an archivist for a Catholic women religious congregation. And it's a very unique position because I interact with dozens of women every single day who are represented in the archival materials. So that's why I call it a living archive, because I can walk into the dining room, talk to a sister, have her tell me a salacious story about before she joined the convent, and then I can go back into the archives and read something about that time. So it's a very humbling experience because you not only get the cultural aspect, you get the almost like the evidence that backs some of it up. So it's humbling, it's amazing. The downside of this is that you get to know them, and the congregation is growing older and they pass away. And as the archivist, and this is similar in most religious congregations, the archivist, and traditionally this position was with a sister. But since the vocations are not what they used to be, now there's a push to get professional archivists in the positions. And so as the archivist, I have a lot to do to prepare for funerals when a sister passes away. I gather photos to display. I work with the funeral home for a photo to use on the memorial card. And I even check spellings of their names for grave markers. And I was attending every funeral. I knew all of this ahead of time. I knew this when I interviewed. I knew that this was going to be a part of my job, but I didn't know how my brain was going to react to this. I had no idea. And I realized kind of about 2 years in, especially like right after the COVID time, that this was going to be hard for me. And I really had to be kind to myself because I started having panic attacks at every funeral. So I explained that I needed some help, or I really realized I needed help with these feelings. And so first I acknowledged them. It's like, all right, this is happening. What are we going to do? And I explained them to my supervisor at the time. And I told her, I'm not going to any more funerals. I can do the work that surrounds them. That's fine. And this was the first step toward advocacy, is setting up a boundary. So boundaries are so important. And a lot of times people will push back and say, oh, but can you just do it one more time? Can you please, just like begging, please do it. And you have to say no, and they'll get mad, but that's their journey and not yours. So as time went on, this kind of system was kind of working, but I was still having trouble. So I ended up going through rigorous therapy and figured out where all of it stemmed from, which was something from when I was a kid. So I thought, someone has to be writing about this. Someone professionally has to be writing about how hard it is to be an archivist processing or dealing with materials that are extremely difficult to look at. And so I went on a quest. And I found that international archivists have this down. So I reached out to an archivist named Jennifer Douglas, who's at the University of British Columbia in Canada, and she's done extensive work on the role of grief in the archival profession. I had no idea this existed. She's been doing it for about 10 years. And then also the Australians have it down. So the Canadians and the Australians they are doing the trauma work. They have got it down. They are great. So another person I talked with was this gentleman named Gordon Rayburn of the University of Western Australia. And he's done similar research on the role of trauma in archival work. Now, I want to kind of qualify this a little bit to say that what I was archiving and what I was handling was not as intense as the topics that these people are talking about. So if you notice, Canada and Australia, they have large Indigenous populations. They have large populations where they've had some extremely terrible things happening. And so what I'm archiving is not Indigenous displacement or human rights violations or wars. But I did have to keep telling myself that these feelings are valid. So even though, I'm not processing materials that are really, really strong and people, I read a survey that said that many people that worked in those types of collections, especially with the native boarding schools in Canada, I'm sure you've seen some of that in the news, that they would just have to quit the profession because it was too much. It was too traumatizing just to be re-traumatized talking to these people. And so it was very helpful for me to know that I wasn't alone, that there are other archivists that have this stuff going on in varying degrees. It's like, it's not the trauma Olympics. We're not competing against each other. Everything is valid. There's just different degrees of what you're working with. And I really wish that I would have found all of this a little bit earlier, because I was still having some trouble. So this all came to a head in January of this year. I had several massive panic attacks, one right after the other. I was really, really sick. And I was like, I have to quit. I have to leave my position. I can't do this, even though I didn't want to do that. I love my job. I love my work. I love the women I work for. But I put in my notice and explained to them exactly what's happening, and several people in my organization were advocates for me without me even having to ask. And I was very grateful for that. They stuck their necks out for me and they offered me a month of medical leave. And so I decided to take it and see how things went. And I think that a lot of times when we think of medical leave, we think, oh, I had a surgery, or, oh, I'm pregnant, or, oh, there's a family issue or something like that. But your mental and emotional health is also included in medical leave. Don't let them forget that. It's so important that we go and burn ourselves out. And then there's no, recourse for that. There's nowhere for us to go, or it feels that way. And so when our human resources person said, this is an option for you, I was like, I had no idea. I would have asked for this 6 months ago. I had no clue that my mental and emotional health was included in that. So during this time, I obviously stayed away from work. I didn't talk to any coworkers. I avoided negative media, which means that I picked up a QVC habit, which is problematic. Because there's just ladies talking to you and they say, oh, you deserve this. Yes. And then I also took time to visit with my family and friends, and it did wonders for me. And I'm so glad that I had that option. So remember that that's a part of, your brain is a part of your body. So it's part of the whole package of you. Now, one of the things that I heard, I went on a women's retreat. I was like, all right, I'm doing all the things. I'm going on the retreats and whatever. And so I went, and one of the women there said that you have to establish your board of advisors. So this is a support system, but it's a little bit different. So I was really struck by what Mackenzie said earlier this morning about using your board to their strengths. So it's the same thing with your support system. These are people that you trust to tell you the truth, but in a supportive and constructive way. So you have to be choosy. Not everyone that you like is going to be on your board of advisors. It's people that are going to give you what you need in that moment and that you trust with your emotional, social, and mental health. And focus on what they're good at. So if you're having a great day, don't talk to the person that's having a difficult time, because that's not going to help you. Or if you feel like you can give something to them, then do that. But it's a give and take. And I think, this was one of the best pieces of advice, because not everyone is going to be your ride or die, your advocate. There will be people that will, and they are on the board of advisors. So after all this, I still have to remind myself to be kind to myself, because I am my number one priority. And this stuff, it goes in waves. you're like, oh, I'm good. And then it's like, oh no. There are just times that it ebbs and flows. And so you just have to be kind to yourself, because I am my number one priority. And the photos that you've seen during this presentation are of all the sisters who have passed away since I started my position with the sisters in November of 2018. And I have fond memories of them, and I use those to keep me motivated to preserve the memories of all the others, past and present. Now we welcome questions.
That was great. We'll say thank you first. Yeah, I can see your hand. And we'll go ahead and start with questions.
We can repeat it so that way, because I don't know what.
Oh, Adam is
Thomas.
coming. He is the mic man.
Thank you, ladies. That was awesome. I think each of you, even though each thing was very unique, I think it's all very important. And at the end of the day, it's all about advocating for yourselves and being able to be the best that you can be, so you can give your organization the best of you to make your organization better. So I applaud you. Sarah, so me and you are Instagram friends.
Yes, we are. You run a lot.
I do run. So, I have been kind of following your journey a little bit through that. And so I just want to say thank you for sharing your story, because it's so important. I have been doing archives work for a very long time, and I also struggle with mental health. I'm very outgoing. I think everyone who knows me knows that, but you can't outrun a panic attack. And I found that out last year as well. So I want to say thank you for that. And I think that there are probably a lot of us that don't think about that. And it's so important to remind yourself that mental health is health. It is protected, even if your employer doesn't want to think it is. It is protected. And if you need a break, you have to do that, because you're not going to be able to provide the best of you to your organization to get, I mean, that's what you're doing. You work so you can live. And if you're not living, you're not going to be able to work. So I just don't really have a question. But I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
And if anyone is thinking of mental health days, those are days off that deserve sick time too. So I advocate that for my staff. And so I just recommend that. I guess one question I do have is, what was the part that allowed you to be like, okay, I'm good, I'm ready to go back?
So that was, and thank you. That's very kind. Your comments are very kind. And the thing was that I ended up kind of switching up my supervisor. And so during that time, I was given the opportunity to just lay it all out. Like, this is what's happening, because they did not want me to quit. Like, they were real scared that I was going to quit. So I had kind of a lot of leverage, but it also kind of stinks that, I said, I'm going to quit. And they're like, oh, okay, we have to, change the things, we have to do whatever. And I'm not trying to put down my employer, because they've been wonderful this whole time. But not everything is, sunshine and bunnies and roses. But I think that knowing that the advocates at work basically said, we are not going to contact you. Even if I said, if the archives catches on fire, will you please call me? And they said, yes. And I said, that is the only time you call me. And so they really stuck to that. No one called me, because I would always get calls on vacation. I would get FaceTimes in my bed in my pajamas on vacation. So it was a real break. And I had things planned that I wanted to accomplish. Like, I made a Lego set, which was perfect for my brain at that time. But I also made a lot of conscious decisions about who I was going to be talking with during this time. Only specific people were getting my energy. So I think being very conscious about that, it really opened, like I feel like a weight lifted, you know, my brain felt different. Just with a month off, it's like a totally different experience. So I think by the time I went back, I was ready because I kind of had this progression of how I wanted my leave to go. And I stuck to that. And then when I got back, it was like everyone was so supportive and so caring. And that helped a lot too.
Sarah, I have a very important question. What was the latest that?
It was Starry, Starry Night by Vincent Van Gogh. And it was a lot of pieces.
It was beautiful.
Thank you.
I have a question for Colette.
Mhm.
The moment in your talk where you're saying you addressed your supervisor and you're like, I don't think that's gonna happen. And so I guess my question is, when it did happen, how did that like, well, maybe how did that moment impact your relationship? And then when you did come on as a permanent position, like how has that been? Like, thinking back to that conversation.
So thank you for the question. My boss at the time was named Libby. And so she just really didn't think it was ever going to happen. She basically said when pigs fly, but she supported me in going after it. So she supported me in asking our supervisor, like, basically the number 2 guy, about pursuing it. So she wasn't like she was mad. She's like, you're gonna get, try to take my job, which I did. But unfortunately, it's because she passed. So that's very sad. That took a lot of time to, I always, even like, it's been almost 4 years and I will be going through like, ooh, this is something cool. And I'll think, oh, Libby would like this. And then it's like, oh, like, wow. But it did not ruin my relationship with Libby. And up until her passing, we were very close friends.
Adam, how do we do the online questions? It's in your chat. But then none.
We don't.
That's the question.
So we had 3 wonderful stories about advocacy having a positive effect. What do we say when we continue to see negative effects when we keep advocating for ourselves? And how do we continue to overcome that obstacle?
I don't know.
So I think that's a really great question because to get to this point, I think, sorry, face is right in the mic. To get to this point, I think, and I don't want to speak for others, but this is just the outcome of one facet of this. And it's also, I think we wanted to pick stories that kind of ended on a higher note. But I think that throughout those, it's a constant battle. And the thing that I always talk about is the boundaries. And I think people will continuously push them and you just have to expect it, unfortunately. But you have to have a way to cope with that. And I think that, having people that support you, having people that, your friends, your coworkers, medical professionals, whoever you want to rely on, you have to have ways to cope with that. And you're going to fail a few times. You're going to say yes to something maybe you shouldn't have, that's too much. But I think kind of getting yourself prepared that people will probably disappoint you, that's okay, because you have other people that are going to be there to support you. I hope that makes sense.
With this very specific example of the exhibit, I'm thinking of where when we tried something different, I mentioned it, but like people were angry and we got some like, I find it weird that someone would come into our exhibit space and they knew what the title was and stuff, like to come in and like complain about how much they hated it, but they did. And for me, it was always like, I would go back to these pictures and stuff of the cute little kids, like juggling and like they had a good time. So that says something more about the person, as you said earlier, like
Yeah.
that's their problem,
Yeah.
their journey. Yeah.
I actually have another story that I won't go into the full details, but basically I had a job. It was draining me completely of all my energy and hope and desire to, uh, it was at Sinclair, I would say. Um, It wasn't in their archive. I did not work in their archive, but I taught, history, for their history department. And, I just couldn't take it anymore. After talking with my boss and basically like, well, this is how things are, I quit. So sometimes you just have to like, this is not a healthy situation for me, and get yourself out.
Yeah, and I think something that you said before, Colette, about going outside of your comfort zone, it's so scary. It's terrifying. But I think that if you can give yourself permission to do it, there's gonna be a net there of people to catch you. And I know that like most of the people in this room would be happy to do that.
I mean, obviously I'm not part of this, but I've been kind of going through something similar in my workspace. And sometimes you have to find other avenues. Like, I was watching an episode of Bluey with my kid the other day. And it was the one where Bluey's outside and putting like things in front of water. Well, that water's still gonna go. It's not gonna stop. It's still gonna find a way. So I think you gotta keep going and figure out another avenue. And in my situation, I found some other people that I could support. And then that allowed for the other individuals who may not have been on board to see, because it wasn't coming from me, it was coming from them. And at the end of the day, does that mean they respect me more or less? It means I'm still gonna get done what I want to get done, and I'm still advocating for what I think is important. So I don't know, Bluey's great, it has great references. So if you haven't watched an episode, I highly recommend it. But again, just find another avenue, because you're gonna get into a stream, you're gonna find the way.
And I know it's close to lunchtime, but there was someone online. They had a question. And it's. They had a question online. Can you talk about possible relation and differences between how deaths and traumatic material affected you and how they affected the sisters?
So we are about to eat, so this is a very in-depth question that I could talk about for a long time. But let me say that over the past 5 years that I've been with them, they're getting older, and the deaths of these sisters are some of the pillars of their community. So they grieve in their own way. They grieve in different ways, but a lot of times they would come and dump on the lay staff, which is people that aren't sisters. And, you cry with them and you see them for who they are, you see their humanity, and you emphasize that. And I think that that's been the biggest thing, is emphasizing everyone's humanity and being empathetic, because a lot of times when we're sad or scared, we are not our best selves. So trying to recognize that is important too.
Don't forget your bingo, okay? And let's thank our presenters. I think we got